If you are stuck on how to elevate your career and your everyday work leaves you feeling exhausted and disappointed, this podcast is for you. You're listening to Work Liberated, the intersection between personal transformation and career empowerment. Listen to industry experts who share valuable advice on dispelling burnout, anxiety, and stress in the workplace through life-changing and innovative strategies. Reconnect with your highest purpose, realign with your core values, and liberate your human spirit by unleashing your full potential in everything you do. Here's your host, Margaret Graziano.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Graziano, and I am the host of Live and Work Liberated. And today my guest is Jeannine Rashidi, author of
Abundance Beyond Trauma.
Abundance Beyond. Can you hold up the book?
Yes.
All right, good. I love the book cover. So tell us, first of all, how you wrote the book, why you wrote the book, and what does it even mean, abundance beyond trauma?
Well, when one comes from a traumatic experience, and I've, had my first 25 years of life, there were many traumatic experiences. And so my personal experience, as well as working with others, is that there's more of a scarcity mindset than an abundance mindset when we've had traumatic experiences. And we tend to live our life that way until we start healing. So as I've, gone through my healing journey, what I've come to is that there is a way to live in an abundance mindset, even though these experiences have happened, and also use them as a way to, heal, look at ourselves so that we can live in that mindset. I chose to write the book mainly because I wanted to offer something to the world after having the experiences I had, something that would offer support, help, and understanding to every demographic out there, regardless of financial ability. So oftentimes, I'll either, give the books away for free or a free workbook, something like that. But the main purpose was to help others and give tools that I felt I needed along the way that I wish I would have had.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I think of the word abundance, I think anything is possible. I think living and acting and operating above the power and freedom line in a place of courage, engagement, innovation, synchronicity. When I think of scarcity, I think of life sort of sucks and it's closing in and we're either annoyed or frustrated or agitated or anxious. And I know it starts at first between the ages of 3 and 5, if not 3, and then further on through middle school. And I had just spent a week with my granddaughter, who is a middle schooler, and it is unbelievable how much trauma she is dealing with. And she doesn't have a traumatic life, but it's like the trauma of being a teenager and the trauma of comparing your body to the bodies on TikTok and the trauma of not liking your face or having pimples or the trauma of being afraid of being judged. And it was palatably confronting of how pervasive that anxiety could be in her whole life.
Yeah.
And very sad, actually. But then I put her on a surfboard and she started surfing and there was no trauma. And so it's like it goes, like mindset can shift that quick. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what your book talks about of the shifting from a space of closed in, withdrawn to the opposite?
So what I refer to the trauma trigger time loop experience when it comes to experiencing that closed off, that shrinking, that small, that little feeling where you no longer feel like you have this expanded ability to see a situation from a 360-degree view. So when you're in that trauma trigger time loop experience, you're no longer present.
Trauma trigger
time loop.
Okay.
So that's when somebody's having more of a flashback experience. They're in some sort of past dynamic that feels present. So in the mind, so even as you're referring to your adolescent granddaughter, same thing. There's something happening in her mind space where she is thinking something of past, how she should be, how she should look comparatively, but that's all based on a previous memory or something that she has seen in her past that she's now identified with. And because she's identified with that, there's this, and same thing when you're having a flashback, you believe it to be happening in real time. So when the way you described it was perfect, because those are the warning signs that let you know, hey, I'm no longer in a place of presence. I'm actually stuck in a moment of past or the trauma time loop where I'm reliving it. So the only way to come out of that, I created the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide, which works with, breath, because wherever the breath goes, the mind follows, working with eye movement to bring you back to a state of presence so that you can get big and tap into your big abundant self, where you have this 360-degree view of your life and what's presently happening, and then where you'd like to take your life.
God, I'm so intrigued by all this. It's interesting because I'm reading this book called The Presence Process, and he is teaching a lot of what you're talking about, and that we don't live in the present, we live in time.
Yeah,
And we live in the
exactly.
past or we live in the future, but we really don't live right now. And I was trying to get this young girl to like, we're in Kauai, man. It's beautiful here. Nobody knows you. You don't have to be worried about like seeing somebody or having them judge you. And she was really resistant actually to breathing or calming down, and I think somebody in her life was mocking it, actually, like making fun of it. And I know that the answer is just like within all of us. And so what does a teenager do if the parents think it's a joke or think they'll outgrow it, and how many do outgrow it? Because I know most trauma begins, it starts as a little kid, 3 years old, and then it's not handled. And now we're teenagers, and then we bring it to the rest of our life. And how do we help these young people if their parents don't see it, that it's a problem?
That's a really good question. And I have many clients who are either adolescents or teenagers. And I have found that it's obviously the ideal scenario is that the parents are on board with changing the dynamic at home, what they believe to be true, how they're communicating with the teenager, but not all of us get that. So if a teenager is willing to work on their own understanding of their own mind, as well as accepting my parents have a different mindset than I do. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that their certain emotional and psychological needs will not be met, obviously, by the parents, because it's not in alignment with where the teenager needs to be. It's actually not in alignment for the parents either, but that's what they learn. They learn that growing up. Their,
Right.
parents taught them. When you mentioned that you get her on a surfboard and she's fine. Well, you have to be present to be on a surfboard. You're riding a present wave. That's why she did so great, because she was present.
Yeah.
And it
She couldn't
sounds
think
so
about anything
simple.
else. She couldn't think about
It
anything
sounds
else.
so simple, and yet our mind, it resonates with the air and the space element, so it's continually moving. So unless we train our mind and we learn to catch it when it goes off into the past or the future, we're going to be having these difficulties.
Wow. So let's graduate from adolescence, which is when it all gets metastasized, to adults. Here we are, adults in working in human systems with. And when I hear the word trauma, it used to make me think like somebody had a very traumatic childhood, but it seems like since COVID, the awareness is we're all dealing with trauma. We all, are dealing with some level of unfilled need in the area of wanting to be loved and accepted, like in life in general, and that's trauma. So before we get into how do we deal with this in the workplace and in relationships as adults, what do you have to say about this word trauma? And
well, it is a loaded word, and many people will compare themselves. So I like to add in undigestible experiences. Anything that was more than your mind body system could handle is considered traumatic for you. And you cannot compare what was traumatic for you versus what was traumatic for me. They're very unique in that way. So it could be anything. In my book, I reference a 2-year-old boy who's drawing a beautiful picture for his mother. Well, she's in the kitchen cooking dinner for the family. So he runs in and he's like, "Mom, look what I made you." But she doesn't even acknowledge him. She shoos him away and says, "Well, not now, son." That doesn't sound traumatic.
right.
But 30 years later, he's now married and he's still looking for acknowledgement, not only from his wife, but from his female friends. And that's now causing conflict because there's so much need for that acknowledgement. So right there, I'm bringing it back into a relationship. That's the perfect opportunity when you recognize you have, whether it's a neediness or codependency, whatever the label is, it's actually an opportunity to turn around and go, hey, what did I not get? I need to figure out how to reparent myself in that case, or relove myself through, bringing in the father archetype, mother archetype, spouse, sister, sibling, any of them.
Yeah, wow. Reminds me of my trip to Peru, where I dealt really with my own terror as a child, or perceived terror, because we don't know really if any of that stuff really happened,
Right.
that I experienced in Peru, but it was hidden, it was submersed or suppressed emotions. And then there were some things that did happen, but it's like this suppressed grief and terror that I wonder how many people are dealing with and don't know they're dealing with it.
Well, that's actually true as well. And many people will question, did I actually have this experience? And the thing about the mind is, if the mind believes something to be true, it is true.
Right.
That doesn't mean that it's actual truth, but
Right.
for that person, that is the truth of what's happening. Therefore, it has to be dealt with from that level. So there's really no need to go on a fact-finding mission necessarily, not necessarily, unless you're trying to, seek some sort of justice in a way. But if something has happened, or you believe that it happened, then that's the trauma that has to be worked through.
And so that it could be as simple as your mom didn't like your picture.
Yep.
Or your dad got remarried, or that your dog died.
Yeah.
And the kid didn't get the kid's needs met. And then the kid grows up into an adult, and now they're running a company.
Mm-hmm.
And they do things like don't take a stand, or tolerate poor behavior from other executives, or cave to the board members who want a higher earning number, or cave to the bully, or lie, or whatever. And what Michael Brown says is, and also I'm reading a book about a pilgrimage, about like the art of pilgrimage. And what he talks about is most people are looking for the Disney World experience that actually takes them out of reality, because they're happier in fantasy, which is why people watch TV, which is why people go to Disney, which is why people have to have everything curated versus just being in a forest preserve or a garden, or someplace like that. So tell me about the pocket guide.
So the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide was designed specifically for when you're in a triggered state and you're not able to come out of it, or you're trying to figure out, how do I get out of this quickly so that I can at least function? So the first 3 steps are to get you out of that state. And then the remaining 6 or 7 steps are if you would like to go in deeper and find out, why did that even come up to begin with?
So can we do one right now?
We totally could.
Okay, so let's just say that do I have to be triggered right now, or can this be being triggered in Hawaii?
You could be triggered in Hawaii. We'll make it work.
So I'm triggered. I'm in Kauai. It's just a day of crisis with this child. And she's very angry about everything, afraid to go outside, doesn't want to go outside, doesn't want me to look at her, doesn't want me to talk to her, doesn't want me to touch her. And there I am triggered. And I know I'm triggered. So that's part of it. You got to know you're triggered.
Yes.
So I'm triggered. What do I do?
Okay. So the first thing you want to do is you want to stop. Don't make any decisions, because when you're in a triggered place, your ability to see and perceive is very narrow. So you never want to make any decisions, because you could take your life in a direction you don't want it to go. So you need to wait till you're out of a triggered state. So the first thing you want to do is stop, don't make any decisions, and then catch your breath. So one of the things that would annoy me greatly when I would be triggered, because I would hyperventilate, is somebody would say, oh, take a deep breath. Well, have you ever tried to take a deep breath when you're almost hyperventilating? You can't do it. So you need to catch the breath. So I say, take 2 quick inhales through your nose and then a long exhale. And you're going to continue doing that a few more times, because wherever the breath goes, the mind follows. This is why the breath is so incredibly important. That's step 1. Step 2 is locate. This is going to help you come back to a state of presence. It's also going to keep the eyes moving in case you're in a frozen state. So identify 3 objects that are around you that represent consciousness, or this time and space. So whether it's the sunlight, the tree, plant in my office, where you were in Kauai, so that would have been very easy to find, something in nature. And again, you're going to continue to catch your breath. So 2 quick inhales and a long exhale. And you're going to keep with that breathing pattern through this whole thing until it starts to calm down, where you can take a long inhale and a long exhale. The third one is to identify your well-wisher. So these are the people that you know have your best interest in mind, that you trust. And usually just by thinking of them, and if you don't have that person, it could be someone you look up to, somebody that brings you a sense of peace or ease. So again, you're giving your mind that visual of this calming person so that you can calm down. Hopefully by now you are able to take a nice big inhale and a long exhale. So those are the first 3 steps. I often will say, if you need to, use the timeout sign. So you can go do this obviously in private, but sometimes say you're in a board meeting, and you get triggered, then you've got to figure out how can you get your breath under control and come back to a state of presence without having to excuse yourself, unless it's a progressive group and you can actually do that, which would be great. So those would be the first 3 steps on how to get out of it. Now, let's say you wanted to go deeper and figure out,
Wait, the first 3 steps are 1, catch your breath.
Stop, don't make any decisions, and catch your breath.
Okay, that's number 1.
Step 2
Look
is to
around.
locate. Yep. Locate 3 things that identify this time and space. Continue to catch your breath.
What's step 3?
And then step 3,
identify your well-wishers.
Yes. And
Okay.
then by then you should be able to breathe. Now, in the workbook that I created, you can go in and really hone in on what triggered you in the first place, so you can figure out at what moment did you actually lose presence. It may not have been right away when she was having her moment, obviously her own trigger, but there was a moment where all of a sudden it took you out of presence.
Yep.
That's the moment you want to look at. And that would be specific to what's going on for you. So once you have identified the trigger, then you can use the adhere process, which is an acronym for explore, discover, heal, integrate, and relate. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go into a more relaxed place. So oftentimes when I'm working with a client, I'll use voice as well as sometimes touch to relax them into almost not necessarily hypnosis, but a very relaxed state, so that they can go deeper in to identify and explore what exactly is happening. Okay, maybe you're feeling triggered in your heart space. Maybe there's a memory coming up, and this will show up differently for everyone. Once you've done that exploration, you will discover the part of you that's triggered. And usually the part of you that's triggered is disconnected, but it's operating, right? That's the part that got triggered. So you want to identify that part of you. And oftentimes it's either an unresolved, a more immature or childlike aspect who had an experience. It was too much to digest and a disconnect happened. And so now we're trying to come in, find that disconnected aspect so we can come back into alignment.
So do some people call that the wounded self?
It could be the wound itself. I try not to label it too much. I let people come up with their own labels. Otherwise, I'm leading and I want it to come out organically. So, and oftentimes people say, oh, I see this little version of myself, or I see a version of me at, 19 years old. It just depends. And sometimes people will see themselves as a different gender. Sometimes they'll see themselves as an animal, and we just go with. So then once you have discovered what part of you is having this experience, then you can identify, well, what does this part of you need? If it's related to a past trauma, and most of the time it is, you know what you didn't get. Because you know what you didn't get, you know what you need. So now this is where you get real big. You get so big that you feel like you're a giant looking at your life and this part of you. And now you're able to look at that part of you and go, oh, I need love. I need somebody to tell me I'm okay, I'm enough. Whatever the dialogue is that needs to be heard. And so you embody that archetype. So, in your case, it might be that, there was an adult who didn't acknowledge or give you something. Once you know what that is, you can embody it and then come in as that aspect. So usually I will guide a client to come in as, let's say, the perfect mother. And you come in as the mother to this part of yourself. So now you're basically in a dual role. This is very empowering for people once they realize I have the ability to come in and heal myself. I don't need the person who, basically was the perpetrator in the trauma to apologize or anything like that, which doesn't, get them off the hook. But what it does is it empowers you that you have all the tools you need within you. And that's really important because people need courage in order to move forward with this type of healing. So you come in as the mother, you heal that part of you, hold that part of you, tell that part of you everything that you needed. And then once it feels like it's settled, and you'll know there'll be a feeling of ease, then you're going to want to integrate. And the way you do that is you usually will look into your own eyes, in this scenario. So the higher self or the archetypal mother with this part of you. And then you connect your breath. You also can hold different body parts. Oftentimes people will hold hands with themselves, look into their own eyes, and then start matching the breath pattern until the two of you become one. So now that part that was disconnected and healed is now integrated. And now the last part is to relate. Well, there's more of you available. You don't know who you are now with this part that's been integrated, let alone whoever you're in relationship with, your family, etc. And that would be the last piece. Now, I always like to check things. So at the end of this, I say, go back and remember when you were triggered. do you still get triggered when you think about it? And if you do, go back and work all the steps until you're no longer triggered, just to make sure that you basically
So
searched
do you
every.
still get triggered?
Oh, yes.
So we all get triggered, even
We all get
therapists get triggered.
Everyone. Yeah.
And what about when people don't even know they're triggered, or they're so triggered they can't even stop? They just are so like, this girl, she does need support. I think every 12-year-old needs support. From what I
Yeah.
hear, everybody that I know who has 12-year-old girls is like, this is normal. I wouldn't have taken her on a trip at 12. And I'm like, I thought 12 was early. Yeah, and no wonder the other grandparents were like, you're really alone with your granddaughter? But so if everybody gets triggered, what if they don't even know they're triggered and they're just upset and they don't consider that triggered?
Well, see, that's where the use of words is important with and understanding your audience. I can say the word triggered to some. I cannot say the word triggered to others because it's not a word that they identify with as, in their vocabulary. So you could say, oh, it seems like you might be upset.
Yeah.
And it's just the act of being upset. Why? What happened there? Why was it so intense for you? Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves when we're having those moments. But to answer your question, when it comes to somebody who doesn't even know and they're kind of, running rampant, again, it just depends on who it is. If you're a safe person for them, you might be able to talk them off the ledge, so to speak. But there might be cases where they just go run amok until they calm down. And that's usually people who will make decisions from that place, which, can sometimes take our life in a direction we don't want it to go.
Yeah, so my decision was, we're not going surfing today.
Okay.
But I wonder if I would have said that or like, we're canceling, the behavior is not acceptable, we're not doing an excursion today.
Right.
That was kind of all I know to do. But then I let her do the same excursion a different day.
Right.
I just said, not this day. But yeah, it's the slowing down of the reaction, which I reacted 3 times in ways that I'm not proud of. Like once I told her she was being a punk. It was like, she refused to let me borrow her charger. She refused to let me in the bathroom. And I'm like, stop acting like this. So that was one of them. But the reality is, before I had done this work, when I was a mom of bratty teenagers, I would have reacted 103 times. I reacted in a way 3 times, which I'm sort of proud of, but I would have reacted way more because it was. And then once I actually looked at her and I said, no matter what you say and no matter what you do, I love you and I always will. And I could see in her eyes, I could see she caught it. She heard it. I don't think anybody's ever said that to me. And I don't think I said that to my kids.
Isn't it fascinating, being a grandmother myself, and I had just taken 2 of my 4 grandkids camping. And so I had a similar experience where I noticed an immense amount of patience that I surely did not have as a mother. Okay. But also when I got frustrated, I realized, wow, okay, there was growth that obviously it came as a grandmother that I didn't have as a mother, but still it pointed out, okay, I got things to work on still.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
It was interesting. All of her triggers about, like, she would not walk by other teens anywhere on the island. We had to bypass them ridiculously, even when we were walking in the ocean. And finally, I'm like, I am not walking. Although I'll swim, you got to swim with me. And she walked in the water, but wouldn't swim. But all of her triggers spun the little pot of my teen triggers.
Yep.
Of not fitting in, of being afraid of being an outcast, of even she had said something and she said, well, I didn't tell my friends I went on vacation, and we'll see who reaches out to me. And if they don't reach out to me, they're not my real friends. And I was like, oh, and then I told my girlfriend, who's also a grandmother, and she goes, oh, that sounds like me. And so it's like, we all have these things that we do to ourselves, and it sticks with us.
Yep.
And nobody was working on this when we were growing up. I just don't think anybody was working on it when we were growing up.
No, not at all. That's why I think our grandchildren are fortunate, and then the generations that will come after them, because there's much more awareness now around this sort of thing. I had post-traumatic stress disorder from the first 25 years of my life. And so when I had just done a speech, and I referenced how my children were triggering my trauma while I'm trying to help them with their trauma.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a double-edged sword. It's like you want to help the person, but that person is also creating angst within you.
Yes.
You know, it is not easy. And this is not something that I was told about before I had kids. So I think we're all just still trying to figure it out, you know? And if it's not our kids, it'll be a coworker, it might be a spouse, it might be a
Yeah,
friend.
so
Like,
let's move to work. Let's move to
yeah,
work because as a recruiter, my first 25 years of work was recruiting. So I was placing people in companies and taking people out of companies. And I started to see patterns that were pretty profound, that there was a track record of people leaving jobs for the same reason over and over again. And what they weren't getting is that the only common denominator was them. And when I now say that in my workshops around culture and leadership, you could see them giggle and laugh, and because it's a safe space and they have that recognition of, oh, I've done that. But people looking for a job almost never put two and two together. Wow, I keep leaving my jobs for the same reason. So how
yeah.
does a person catch that they have a trigger with authority, or they have a trigger with being told what to do, or they have a trigger with being given performance feedback or something like that? I'm moving around too much.
Well, it's really more about self-awareness. You know, one has to be willing to reflect on themselves. So until that happens, there won't be an awareness. But once that happens, then it's the opportunity to start looking at those cycles, those patterns. There's a worksheet in my workbook that will help you actually look at, well, what are the cycles that you are familiar with, whether it's through your family line, through work. Oftentimes people come in and they're like, you know, I keep having the same thing happen at work and I don't understand why.
Mm.
And then we'll use the adhere process, and then they figured it out. And it's usually something similar. It will go back to some sort of authority figure, or, you know, some form of undigestible experience, but one has to be willing to look at themselves.
Yeah. So it's funny because it's not funny. I mean, it's a resonant in the leadership model. We use the center of it as a heart, and it is the leader within. And that's the Ignite Your Power program. It's all about the leader within. And we call it saboteurs, patterns, obstacles, reoccurring obstacles that are self-limiting beliefs, whatever you want to call it. But it all
Yeah.
does boil down to an inability to quickly recover from upset, quickly
Yes.
recover from that setup, as Michael Brown calls it, that triggering moment. And then all sorts of things happen. Like it could be quitting a job prematurely, or taking the wrong job, or marrying the wrong person, or tolerating abuse, or could be simply not speaking up. Like I coach a COO, and today it was all about like, I need to own my voice.
Yeah.
And the question is, which a lot of them don't want to look at, well, what would have you hold back your voice?
Yeah.
What would have you not say, this is what we're doing? I'm the CEO. This is what we're doing. Come and join me. This is what we're doing. What would stop that? And that's the prickly part for some people. Like, I just don't want to go there.
Well, because it's scary.
Yeah.
Now, either they do know the moment in time where, you know, their voice was cut off, or they're afraid of what they will discover if they look at it, because they've gotten this far without having to look at it.
Yeah.
And usually, and this is where the difference between scarcity and abundance is, the scarcity mindset says, we don't really need to look at that. I'm not going to go there. I think I'm doing good. Whereas the abundance mindset says, how much further could we go if we looked at this?
Yeah, that's great. So when I was 36, before I was 36, I didn't want to do the work because I thought I would lose my edge. I thought I would lose my mojo, what had me be a top producer. Somebody said the right thing to me, and I started, I went to the Landmark Forum and started doing all that work. And then the world became open for me. And I knew this was going to be my new career. And I think it's just going to keep moving, like eventually from corporate into large group audiences. But the power was, I don't actually need that edge. I don't need it to be successful. I can keep everything that helped me be successful, and I could move through and to the next level.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a summit on reclaiming vitality.
Okay.
Reclaiming your vitality, reclaiming our vitality. And I think your entire subject would be a great talk for that. Have you ever thought about, if people can't handle the word trauma, what you would call it?
So more often than not, I will say undigestible experiences, and then you can see the wheels turning, versus when you say trauma, people say, oh, I don't really have trauma.
Right.
So I actually don't use the word trauma too often because of that. And again, it's all about knowing your audience and the words you use.
Yeah. And what's in the way? What's in the way of experiencing like true presence and true, like the surfboard? Like you could see in this girl's face the joy, and there were several moments where she was in the moment. She's super witty. Like there was a bug and she said something like, oh, I said, I take the bug spray out because it's upside down and it's bugging me. And she goes, dad joke. And like, just really like in the moment, understanding like puns. And I do think that's part of being present is that wittiness. Like,
Yes.
when you are truly witty, you're right there with those words. And I have another friend who does paintings and he calls it soul surfing. And he is writing a book right now about a ballerina, a surfer, and a businessman. And the surfer's fully self-expressed, living in the moment. The ballerina's living in the moment and the businessman is miserable. It's really interesting. So how about we have a few more minutes left? What would be some advice for people that are looking for work in regards to not continuing to keep creating the exact same situation that they have just left or are trying not to create?
Well, this is actually the subtitle of my book, which is Discovering Your Courage for Change and Commitment to Yourself. See, the relationship that we have with ourselves will affect every single relationship we have outside of ourselves. So if we are not willing to first look at ourselves, something is going to go awry in those outer relationships and it's going to affect you. So you have to be willing to have courage to step into a life that's different than what you've known.
Yeah, great. So the bottom line is do the work on yourself before looking for this new job. I used to say that to candidates all the time. And even people that I coach, they're like, I think I should leave my job. I said, well, you should do a little more work on yourself first. Otherwise you're going to, and it's the same thing with dating. Like I have been doing a lot of deep work on myself because I didn't really believe in the whole child within or parenting. Like I was, oh, come on, I do all this other stuff. I don't need to go there. And I have been going there over the last couple of years. It's one of the reasons I reached out to you actually from my Peru visit. Your face just like popped up. And I had already been doing that work with Dr. Margaret Paul, whose work is not that different than yours actually. And
I think a lot of us have a very similar work. And I think it's beautiful because there's really no competition. Right. There's so many people who need it. It just depends on what flavor works best for you.
That's right.
That's really all that it is.
And some people don't even like the word inner bonding, right? That's like too much. And some people don't like the word trauma. Like I would turn the channel off if they talked about trauma because I actually was in denial that I ever had trauma. Now I grew up in a household of drug addiction and alcoholism and violence. There was trauma, but I was in deep denial that any of that affected me literally until probably 5 years ago. Like I knew there was residual stuff, but I didn't realize how much inside was hurting because of never digesting that pain, that grief, that terror, that terror that is real. And I mean, even with my granddaughter, I got really present and I started crying. And she also, that needed to happen. I said, all I wanted to do is have a good trip with you. And you're not letting me, you're not allowing me in. And she again stopped and got it. Because normally I just get aggravated with her, probably like her mother does and like her father does. But I got really present to the anguish of loving her so much and having her not want at this age that love or that, anyway.
And well, I think it's beautiful too that you had your moment of crying because that's how that's like the release valve for the heart. Charaka, one of the greatest practitioners of Ayurveda, says Hridaye Chetanastanam, which means the seat of consciousness resides in the heart. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to come into alignment with that consciousness.
Awesome. That's a great place to end. So Jeannine Rashidi, hold up the book again. How do people reach you?
You can find me at goodbyetension.com. And you could also send an email, info@goodbyetension.com. You could also find me on social media, Jeannine L. Rashidi.
Good. And I think the title of your talk for the summit should be Goodbye Tension with that subject, that whatever you read as
the subtitle, Discovering Your Courage. Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
good.
Do it.
Well, we're going to lunch soon, right?
Soon. Yep, we are.
Okay. All right. Nice to see you again. Bye. Thank you.
You too. Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Work Liberated. May these nuggets of wisdom from the most inspiring human potential catalysts today guide you in becoming someone who can work exceptionally with others and accomplish goals inside the collective. Continue your journey as a fulfilled and self-actualized person by listening to more episodes at www.workliberated.org. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a positive rating, and share with your friends. That's all for now. See you on the next one.